All right, we've got a new bombshell article for Fanatics. I'm going to walk you through some of the big headlines. There's a valuation change. I know about a new investor. We have their revenue numbers for this year. We have their projections for next year. I also personally sat down with Michael Rubin last week for a couple hours and discussed some of this stuff. So I'm going to walk you through all that. And also, the white parties are over, which I find interesting. I'm going to take you through this article and a lot of the different insights that are inside because there are some other surprising investors in Fanatics that I did not know about. All right, so I was just talking about the white parties. That's sort of the headline of this thing. They are over. Last year's white party will be the last one. It's funny, you learn here that people are offering him like $5 million just to attend this thing. It's probably a good deal too in terms of the networking that could be done there. So if we scroll down, it's I like this quote here. There's nothing wrong with having fun. I totally agree with that. Work hard, play hard. All right, let's get into actual numbers. So SoftBank actually invested in Fanatics, and it was a valuation of $25 billion. So if you remember, not too long ago, they were valued at $31 billion. So that's a bit of a drop. The interesting thing here is they're not concerned with the drop, because they've grown 15% in terms of revenue last year to $8.1 billion. They're projected to hit $9 billion this year for 2025, which would be like an 11% increase. Obviously, this isn't profitability, and that gets a little tricky with a holding company and three children company, if you will. But it does make you think like, all right, what happened with the valuation here, and why did it go down if the revenue projections are growing? The answer to that obviously is it's a non-revenue factor that will cause this. It could be sentiment. It could be dilution of a certain investor. It could be debt numbers. It could be profitability. It could be anything. It's a private company. I don't actually have the numbers, but there's something going on there. Although it seems like they are moving forward in a healthy way as a parent company. Obviously, the gambling peg of that company is using a lot of the energy. We'll get into that in a second. This is interesting. Tom Brady is a Fanatics investor. I didn't realize that. I assumed they were tight. Obviously, Tom Brady went to Fanatics Fest, and he's done a lot with Rubin. He also does like the media circuit and pushes Fanatics. So it's interesting. I had the pleasure of meeting Michael last week, and we just talked about his rise, and we talked about Fanatics a bit. And one of the big takeaways I got from that discussion is he told me that his power, or his superpower as an entrepreneur, is relationships. And having relationships and having a network is everything. I completely agree with that. You'd be amazed at the power of the network. We never tap into it enough. You're alumni from whatever college you attended, or if you're a Boy Scout, tap into all the other Eagle Scouts out there. He's done a good job with networks and relationships his entire life. And Brady is probably he's probably one of his best friends at this point. And that's great because, you can leverage that for each other. I'm sure Michael does things for Tom, and Tom does things for Michael. This one's interesting. I actually brought this up in my conversation with him last week. Regulation is definitely a threat to Fanatics, especially when Panini loses the sports card licensing. He's going to have to do his best to convince regulators. He needs to have lobbyists on board now, like immediately, just taking dinners with the right congressman and moving things along and greasing the wheels. That's just how America works. Love it or hate it, because his job is to convince Washington that this is a media company / clothing company / entertainment company, and therefore it's wider, and he's competing with DraftKings and Nike and eBay, and then, all right, they're not going to touch it. But if Washington, in an uneducated way, starts to think, okay, Fanatics is more of a sports card company, or they hone in on that, then you have to worry, because you'll get that antitrust stuff, and that will, you want to talk about a time suck and a cost suck and a legal, it'll be a legal morass of just trying to get through this. Should nip it in the bud now, have some lobbyists, and start telling people in Washington that Fanatics is a sports and entertainment company, not a trading card company. They got to get away from that. Just hope that one of the old senators isn't a collector that's pissed off or something about Topps, because that will cook this fast. But the article actually talks about that here, where I suggest that regulators may have cause to probe their dominance. He gets up in his chair. He folds his arm defensively. I run this business like a startup. He certainly does. And he points out that fans have a choice. I actually just brought up Nike. And that's true. But when it comes to sports cards, they do not have a choice. If they want a particular player in a particular uniform with a autograph on the card, there is no choice other than Topps or Fanatics for certain players. So that may be the case for apparel, but he's got to be careful with this one child company under the holding company. If that is deemed a monopoly, especially soccer cards in Europe, like if Panini ever loses that license and Fanatics picks that up, if I was Fanatics, I wouldn't even touch soccer, because if they do, somebody in Europe is terrible with this, man. They will antitrust sue them into oblivion. Not oblivion, but it's going to cost like $500 million to defend that. So just be careful there. That's my only advice. So I agree with this here. I think in America he's probably fine. It's a sports and entertainment company. All right, so I didn't actually realize JayZ was a partner in Fanatics and invested like Tom Brady. Obviously, we've all seen the news and the federal lawsuit, the rape allegations. These are obviously allegations until they enter a courtroom and you move on with proceedings. So they're doubling down on this partnership. They're honored to have Jay as his partner. And they're backing him, which makes me think that maybe these charges are cooked up, but we'll see. That's not my game. I am not a legal guy, so I'm not even going to pretend to understand what's going on here. Obviously, there's serious allegations, and hopefully they're not true. All right, sports bet spending. So we've got the holding company, Fanatics. Under that, we've got clothing, sports cards, collection, stuff like that. And then you've got the gambling one. Which one do you think is costing all the money? It's the gambling one. So we now know that Fanatics has spent $1 billion on that business over the past few years and now has a 5% market share. I believe they are number 3 or 4 behind DraftKings, FanDuel, and MGM. They're number 4, actually. And that's interesting. It tells you how much market share DraftKings and FanDuel have. It's probably substantial. They were the first market movers here. So it will be interesting to see if he continues this investment. And the game here is not a margin game at all. This is a money pit. This is a bet. Ironically, because it's a betting arm. You're going to need to spend a lot of money here to compete. This is all about market share, advertising dollars, word of mouth. His strategy here should be to buy up every single podcast and YouTube channel that talks about sports gambling, every influencer that does. He needs to get, I would get a SWAT team to work from the ground up and just attack everybody who talks about even sports cards and gambling on them. He should go after them and spin it. It's funny, like we have DraftKings as a sponsor on this show, great sponsor. And we've been talking about gambling more on this show because it's an interesting part of society that's climbing. It's sort of the Back to the Future 2 timeline, the Biff Tanner timeline, the one where he gets the comic book and that's where I personally think we're headed as a society. That's where I think modern sports cards are headed, just breaking and gambling. And it's probably the place to be. It's why we've talked about it a lot on this show. So it'll be interesting to see how he attacks this here, but it's a market share game all the way, cost be damned. This is going to impact his ability to IPO or not, which is massively important to Fanatics as a whole. It seems, although from this article, it's not as important as I thought for Michael, but we'll get into that in a second. This one more interesting note before I talk about the IPO and a couple other things. Michael Rubin actually wants to take the 3 Fanatics businesses, merchandise, collectibles, betting, into a single app. That's going to actually say, he needs to streamline everything. Like these children companies eventually are going to have to conglomerate or aggregate, whatever word you want to use, and it's going to save him accounting time, people time. Like, I imagine there'll be some personnel reductions at some point if they do that. He needs to combine all these things. The reason he's doing it now is it's optimized for profitability and investment and valuation, but it's not optimized to run as a profitable business. It will be eventually, but obviously he's got other fish to fry first. All right, IPO stuff. This was surprising to me. It says Fanatics is likely to enter the stock market eventually. Of course they are. Like, every company eventually wants to be public, because as soon as you access the public markets, the liquidity is just, it's like unlimited. You can do whatever you want. Obviously it costs you, costs equity, but he wants to get there. But it seems like this sports betting arm is more important right now, and they are opposing. The more you spend on this sports betting arm, the longer the IPO gets pushed out. Like, if they wanted to IPO now, they would just shutter the sports betting arm, crank out Tops Now, which I personally estimate at $50 million a year in revenue. I don't know, what the real numbers are, but that was my estimate. And I think that it's probably something like a 40-50% margin. You crank stuff like that out and you work your way to an IPO, and you do the media circuit with the investment banks, and you're done. You don't mess around with a third arm and spend $1 billion and spend another $1 billion. So it's more important to him, and that's cool. It seems like something else he wants to win, and win big. And so if he can increase that 5% market share, 10, 20, this is where society's going, and it's where Fanatics is that's a big bet. Merchandise is merchandise. I mean, that's probably a bit saturated unless they expand to women and women's fashion, which is something else that I think is super important and they need to do. But if they can't expand that to women, that company's kind of, the growth potential is reduced. And so you look at sports cards, and they can definitely crank there with the new licenses and gambling, right? So that's this is interesting here. Ruben, who holds the majority of voting rights despite only owning a 30% stake in Fanatics. I didn't know he owned 30%. I have not reviewed all the the quarterlies and the Wall Street documents. So this is the first time I'm seeing his actual stake in Fanatics. But he's smart. He kept the voting shares. That's what you do. You need the power. I can't imagine him running a company where he didn't have at least 51% voting rights. He's beast. He's a beast, and he wants to. And he even says here, it's a dictatorship. I'm just being real. Of course it is, man. In a vote, 30% or 40% of shareholders might say they want to go public now, but it's not a vote. It's my way or the highway. And when I was talking with him, I definitely felt that energy, but it's why he's been so successful. He's just got that attitude, like, F everybody, it's my way, and I'm going to live and die with it. And so far, he's done pretty damn well for himself. One quick side note about his personality as an entrepreneur. He says, I'm not embarrassed to say this, but I don't have hobbies. Business is my life. It's what I do. It's what I'm good at. I don't want a work-life balance. This is a very common denominator you hear about anybody worth 9 figures or more. They tend to have just prioritized business. They like it. That is their hobby. They don't watch Game of Thrones at night. That's not fun to them. What's fun to them is thinking about the next market to conquer or the next company to disrupt or whatever. And you got to respect it. One final note on the white parties, which I find to be interesting. So it says here, the concept of the white party is effectively dead. Obviously, Diddy is wrapped up in some stuff. And I did a biography on Michael Rubin, I don't know, a month back or something like that. I know he watched it. And my recommendation at the end was that he's a beast of an entrepreneur. He's a very successful billionaire. But the one piece of kryptonite that he's got to deal with are these white parties. I recommended that he lives like more of a Steve Jobs or Tim Cook type of CEO, or, the Google CEO or the Microsoft CEO. They're not doing this stuff. It's fun. And I agree with his earlier quote, like, life's all about having fun. I'm down with that. But you got to recognize that this is a massive risk. Hopefully he's got a good security team advising him and stuff like that. He made the right decision here. If he did a white party this summer, man, I don't think the PR could have been controlled. So smartest thing he ever did. Nobody going to that party, I assure you, is allowed to wear white of any kind. It's going to be like a black party, like black clothing, brown, purple, whatever. Everybody dresses like Prince. It's going to be something else. Ain't going to be a white party. And I actually applaud him. This, I imagine, was probably a behind-the-scenes fight that he probably willingly said, all right, you know what? I'm going to let this one slide, even though I am the dictator. So good for him for recognizing this as a weakness. You've removed one weakness from your game. Now you got to tackle the government side of things. That could be another potential weakness. But my take on this whole thing is Fanatics is still growing. They're spending a lot. They're making bets. And it's going to take a few years to see how these bets play out. We're going to find out the answer to this in less than 5 years. I think in 5 years, we will know whether they either shutter the gambling or take more market share. That's a binary outcome. Sports cards will grow and will grow profitably. Merchandise, we shall see. Again, they need to attack women. I've got ideas there, but I'm not going to do it in this video. And we just got to see how all these bets land. But good for him for placing the bets, because a lot of people don't realize the amount of risk it takes to get to this place in life. I'm not a billionaire. But I've taken massive risks, and everybody sees like the car you drive or the house you live in or whatever, but they don't see like that. Like you don't sleep an entire night because of a decision you have to make the next day about something. He's probably done 1,000 of those, and he's sort of immune to it now, and he's going to make 1,000 more, and he keeps adding zeros to things. So good on him. Great article. I'll leave a link in the description, and hey, drop a follow. I love covering this stuff, not only from a sports card perspective, but from a business perspective. I think it's important to understand the parent company that owns so much of our space. Thanks, everyone.